Welcome to video lesson number 4 in Module 215, Advanced Behavior Management and Programming. Again, returning to pervasive skills, we want to talk about those approaches that will help to develop the ability of the supported person to have better coping skills and better communication skills. If you think about it, there's probably no more dignified way to help people improve their behavior than by giving them the tools they need to say what they need and act on their own behalf, to bring themselves down when feeling anxious, or to go and solve the underlying needs that might be causing people anxiety or discomfort. So when we do this, we not only reduce the problem behavior, but most important of all, we help people to be better and happier, which is why the behavior improves. So let's talk for a moment about the ingredients that we need if we're going to do this thing we call coping. It's really not just one thing. And what it certainly isn't is just kind of putting your head down and waiting out the storm or grinding it out. No person can do that all of the time. And many of the people we support are actually surprisingly good at doing that. But all of us have limits. So if we're not going to just put our head down and weather the storm, what do we need to do? Well, there's a number of ingredients. The first is we need some ability to communicate. But remember, we don't always need that to be verbal. If you have ever parented a small child, you know that when they were infants, you could tell a lot just from the nuances of their cry. A person doesn't necessarily need to have a physical ability to verbalize. They could write, sign, use images, body language, tones of voice, and other types of behavior. Sometimes it's up to us to codify or create a defined text of what people's behaviors mean. I've literally worked with people who had a dictionary of their behavior so that when a new staff person came on, they understood that that person bouncing on one leg or staying in the upstairs bathroom or using the word door meant something different than if another person had done those things. So we have to create a mechanism so that people can communicate. We also need to take a look at the cognitive ability a person has that's internal, sort of the thermometer that measures what's going on. This is not an easy thing for us to develop. We're going to talk a bit about this more as this video progresses. But if you've ever tried to teach a child to toilet train, you know the hardest part of that was teaching the child to recognize the internal sensations that their body had, telling them it was time to go to the bathroom. We couldn't see it. And we couldn't demonstrate it when we felt it. So there's a lot of work that goes into practicing teaching people to respond to those cues. And it's especially difficult when there are communication difficulties. Another example is that child with the runny nose. For them, they can't even tell that their nose is running. Everybody else can see it, but they don't think of it as a problem, and they don't recognize it as something where they need to act. So it can take time and practice to get there. It's also important for people to possess assertiveness. Now, you may have been raised with the definition of assertiveness as speaking on your own behalf, but that's not really the complete definition. In psychology, we often use the word volition, V-O-L-I-T-I-O-N, which means really acting on one's own behalf, and that's what assertiveness is. If you get up in the middle of a class and go to the bathroom because your body tells you to do so, you're being assertive. If you put your hand up to ask a question because you missed something, you're being assertive. If you take a sip of your coffee when you're thirsty, you're being assertive. Many of the people we support don't do that. They may lack self-esteem, and that might be part of the reason. They simply just don't feel good enough to take that chance. What might seem like a commonplace activity to you might seem like a big leap to them. They also don't necessarily understand the timing and the skill set of when to do that, how to actually say something, or understand that they're allowed to do it in some contexts. In the last video, we talked about prompt dependency and learned helplessness. Many of the people we've supported have intuitively learned that if they don't rock the boat, if they let other people take care of the decision making, they'll get in trouble less often. And so they just sort of wait until somebody comes along and tells them to do the next thing. And it can be very difficult to get people to move out of that zone into taking a chance or acting on their own. Another thing that we need is opportunity. If we don't know that we can go and get a glass of water, we don't get a glass of water. But even if we know we're allowed and we don't know where the water glasses and the water are kept, then we don't go there. One of the most important ingredients is the attention we give to people. If they need us to go and get something or have something and we aren't available, then they're not going to come to us. Instead, what they're going to do is use probably disruptive acting out behaviors that make us come running down the hallway. So the more that we spend time with people, the more that we ask people what they want, the more that we show a responsiveness, the more likely we're going to hear those messages before they become significant behavior problems. And that leads us to the third and final part of these last three ingredients. We need to make sure that when people are expressing what they want, we are responsive. Not just saying good job or thank you, but the most important reinforcement for that behavior is to follow through in what the person is indicating. So if somebody says to you, I don't want to go bowling, as a staff person, not only should you not go bowling, but you should actually thank the person and reward the person for expressing what they want. Too often I see staff do the opposite, try to convince the person that they should go bowling or that, it's inconvenient if they don't follow along. We give that names like being non-compliant or stubborn, but really we constantly expect to be heard for these choices. And we expect people to not only listen to us, but to do it with respect. And that's what we should be doing with people as well. So it's important for us to think about how we furnish people with the knowledge that they are allowed to act on their own, with the knowledge that they're worthwhile people, building their self-esteem, with plenty of opportunity to act, whether it's seeking us and our help or finding ways to simplify things so that people don't need to go through us, and giving people the opportunity to see that what they say moves us off of our preferred way of being or our initial way of being. In other words, letting them see that they do in fact have the influence over us. And the more we do that when people are polite and mild-mannered, the less they'll need to do it in a way that's aggressive or angry. What sort of skills do we need? Well, we need a whole bunch of adaptive behaviors as well. We have a toolkit that we're allowed to use, and the bigger our toolkit, the better we tend to be at coping or adapting. And I like that word better than coping. Coping sort of suggests that we're emotionally putting up with things. But adapting suggests that we can actually take a situation and make ourselves fit it or make it work for us or even improve because of what we're going through. That's called transcending. So adaptive behaviors allow us to make adjustments. And you do this so often throughout the day that you probably don't even notice most of them. And that ability to do that is why, even as the world around you is changing, you're managing most of the time to keep your stress level low and your happiness level high, and your behavior follows suit. So some examples of adaptive behaviors are the ability for a person to take a break or to use a tool, such as saying, I want to go and get a cup of coffee, which is an energy tool, or go to the bathroom, which is a biological tool. This is our repertoire, our toolkit, and the more that we help people to have a full toolkit, the better off they'll be. These again require people to have some physical and communicative ability, but that doesn't mean we can't adapt them so that people have different ways. If a person can't hold a coffee cup because it's too heavy, find a lighter coffee cup, or because they don't have the right grip, get an occupational therapist to help you create something that has Velcro. If you're worried about people burning themselves, straws and ice cubes can go a long way. So little things like that. I just used the example of coffee, but there's countless others. Again, provide people with power and opportunity. Let them know and reward them for using that power. And reward them mostly by listening. These are things that are going to take time. You have to literally teach them, sometimes in the academic approach, sometimes in social approaches like role plays and little plays. Sometimes we have to actually review behavioral episodes with people. Hey, how did that go today? And what can we learn from it? Let's debrief. Self-teaching like workbooks and journaling can be valuable. So those are just a few examples, but it's something you're going to have to probably do over a course of a very long time. We also need some ability to have cognition, but we can help people to need less of it. The ability to understand what's going on in the environment can help people to learn with things that they have to accept. That's a very difficult thing because some things in our world cannot purely be stopped or changed. like dealing with death, for example. When a person is going through that process, there's really not a lot of physical work you can do. It's about helping people to accept. And that can be a real challenge because you're going to work with people sometimes who just don't possess the capacity to understand where their loved one has gone, or why the day program is no longer open, or why their favorite activity has been canceled this week. Processing, decision making, memory, and something we call projection are also really important assets. Projection means the ability to see how something I'm doing today means something again tomorrow. As strange as it might seem, you might, for example, notice that the garbage man came 4 Thursdays ago, 3 Thursdays ago, 2 Thursdays ago, and as this Thursday comes, you might have decided, well, this is the day that the garbage man comes. You're using the skill of projection. You're saying the past offers me some hints as to what might happen in the future. Sometimes it's not about patterns. Sometimes it's about logic, right? For example, you might say, all right, we use umbrellas on rainy days. The forecast for tomorrow is for it to be sunny. Therefore, I don't need my umbrella. That's logic. Both of them are projections, but you can also see that both of them took a lot of recognition of what was going on and a cognitive power. That's something that may not be there. So we may have to do some of the adapting for people. We may have to tell them some of these ingredients so that they can do the other parts for themselves. Knowledge and skill are power, and you've probably heard people say that before. But the more we help a person to be more capable, the less you'll see behavioral issues. Some of the things that we can help people to do, and anything on this list is going to help. The more we get from this list is going to make even bigger difference. The ability to express oneself emotionally, whether it's crying, whether it's drawing, whether it's talking. And if you don't do it, people will tend to express things at a level that is more critical or in crisis. And by then, it's hard on everybody, including the person. Expressing choices and preferences. And let me tell you something. If a person's not yet able to make really big choices in their life, for example, the choice to live alone, you can get them closer and closer every day by helping them to make as many other choices as possible. It might be, what toothpaste are we buying? Or what canned vegetable do you want to have on your supper tonight or in your supper tonight? Or which staff person would you like to sit in what seat around the table? And the more that we do that, the more that you're going to teach people that choice making is good. We're going to build the muscle, and we're going to show people that we respect their choices. Getting people to be engaged in self-assessment, sitting down with them and doing the check-ins I talked about in the last video is useful in another way, and that is that it teaches people to slow down and self-examine, to get a little bit of meta-awareness. And that's something a lot of people really don't naturally do. Developing assertiveness, practicing the ability to actually say what they want in any moment. And this can be difficult because sometimes people, you'll ask them what they want and they'll say, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And it can be really sometimes an uphill battle to get people to finally commit. Using humor, believe it or not, is a vital social skill. So the more that we teach people ways to express humor, the better. Ways to ventilate that are safe for other people. I've worked with people that ripped up egg cartons, milk cartons. I know people who are punching bag folks. I know people who gardened furiously. I know a person who would go out in their back patio and put their headphones on and dance and dance and dance until they were completely soaked in sweat. And when they came back in, they were an entirely different person. So that worked for that person, and that's what they did. Others that I worked with would sit down and read the Lord's Prayer on a card that just kept reading over and over and over again until they felt better. Whatever works for that person. Physical self-care, teaching people how to go and meet their biological needs, teaching them how to go through routines that are meant to de-escalate them. This is important. Avoidance, teaching people simply how they can avoid things that are stressful for them, or at least avoid them until they're feeling like they're ready. And teaching people specific anger and stress management methods, such as deep muscle relaxation, and we'll get into these in a minute. So, some specific coping skills. Biofeedback is a really good one. Often people have difficulty using emotions, the sorts of words that you saw on the feeling wheel, but they can detect the way that their body feels, for example, the tension in their muscles, or how hot their skin feels, or whether their stomach feels like it's gurgly or not. And by getting people to talk about those things and then having them to start to practice and looking at the rest of the context, they can start to see how those feelings can sometimes be a clue to their emotions at the same time. So we've literally had people with autism look at their faces in the mirror and start to understand what it means when they're smiling. So it's a strange way for us to think that we would ask people to look at their physiological symptoms to get a clue about their emotions. But it turns out that our emotions create and respond to our physical symptoms. It's a biofeedback loop. And not only is it important for people to name those things, but if we can help people biologically, if we can literally get a person to practice the facial expression of smiling or the body language of dancing, guess what? It actually starts to help people feel happier, strange as it might seem. Reading the person's body language and facial expressions and learning to give those things a feeling vocabulary, helping them to do that by practicing and saying, when your face looks this way, this is what it's called. And having them look at other people's faces, whether it's photographs or real life examples, going to the mall and doing a little people watching. What do you think that man is feeling? What would you call that person's feeling? And you can do these things in combination so that people learn to recognize the feelings of others and themselves. Reinforcing that assertiveness we spoke of earlier. Having people act on their own and then responding to it, even when they tell you something that's a challenge, or even when they tell you something that you might think of as a refusal or inconvenience. Saying good job and showing good job by responding to it is very important. Using paraphrasing and reciprocity to get back to people and say, hey, here's what that behavior said to me in words is also valuable. Asking people, teaching people to ask for a break or giving them functional equivalents, like giving them tickets that they can use to take breaks. And you can give them the tickets and they can put them all together and take one long break, or they can take, if you gave them 3 5-minute tickets, they can take 3 5-minute breaks in the course of a day. I've seen people have red lights and green lights in their desk. I've seen them have a hand that they flipped over that was red or green, or an open and closed sign, whatever works. Social stories are very valuable for teaching people these things. Social stories are something you'll have a chance to look at if you want to as part of your literature researched essay. But basically, social stories are stories that are simple and they're personalized. The individual becomes a subject in the story. And this is important because the person is much more likely to read a story if they're the main character. Sometimes the stories don't have much that's changed about them except the name, but you can often see people being creative with these, putting images that the person has drawn or photographs from the person's own life, or hybridizing stick people diagrams or bodies with the person's face on top. And you can even buy the book and customize the stories a little bit to fit the person's needs. One of my favorite things to do is to make a social story as a video. And using a little creative cutting and pasting, you can often have this person star in their own video and model the behavior that we want them to use. So if you're editing that person well, you can have somebody else shot from behind, for example, that looks somewhat like the person doing some of the things you want. And then when the person watches the video makes it look like that person has done the behavior the way you want. And they're more likely to do it after seeing themselves model it. You can also teach people relaxation exercises. Yoga, cyclic breathing, deep muscle relaxation, self-hypnosis, meditation are a few, and I would encourage you to look them up. I mentioned DMR, or deep muscle relaxation, earlier. It's a very simple technique, and basically it just has people start at their toes, contract their muscles, hold it for 5 or 6 seconds, and then let it out. Often we use words like, see if you can melt into the floor, or let yourself go as loose as you can. In many ways, it's similar to self-hypnosis. Sometimes we use white noise or music as a way to help go through this, but it's a really good thing to have in your repertoire to have people learn some of these skills. And sometimes they're, as I said earlier, completely customized to that person. It might be that they sit there and they read a particular poem or a particular prayer that works for them. And doing real life review, going through and having something like a weekly meeting with that individual, or sometimes between roommates or program mates, and having them debrief on experiences, what worked and what didn't work, so that staff people are noting that Johnny did really well at handling the fact that dinner was late on Tuesday night and looking at what he did there. But maybe he didn't do quite as well when his regular staff person wasn't in on Thursday night, and we could look at what might have happened in that circumstance. Not only can we talk about it, but we can actually role play it and practice it. Role playing and rehearsing are slightly different. When we role play, sometimes we change something up and see where it takes us. Once we settle on a routine, then we rehearse it. We practice actually saying it the way that we are planning to try. And group meetings to sort of air out difficulties and come up with plans are also very valuable ways to help people as they're moving forward. So I'd like you to think a little bit about how you might utilize some of these skills if you were imagining going back to our Scott case. That's what I'd like you to think about as you are doing your blog this time. What sorts of coping skills or communication skills could we build into the life of Scott, and how might we have gone about enhancing them for him? Don't forget to be comprehensive. Choosing one of these is likely not going to be enough, and many of these practices can go together effectively.